Ken Whiting here with a paddling guide to one of my favorite places in the world, Georgian Bay. Georgian Bay is a truly unique place. Now, if you don't know anything about Georgian Bay is an offshoot of Great Lake Huron. It's on the northeast side and it's all within the province of Ontario's boundaries. Even though it's a bay, an offshoot of Great Lake Huron, it's a massive body of water. It's about 190 kilometers or 120 miles long and around 90 kilometers or 50 miles wide. It's about 80% of the size on its own of Great Lake, Ontario, and that's why some people believe it should be considered the sixth Great Lake. Now, what makes Georgian Bay so unique as a paddling destination is the fact that the northern end and the eastern side have over 30,000 islands, beautiful granite that is smoothed and rounded by Mother Nature and time, and classic windswept eastern pines. Now, this video is designed to be almost like a little guidebook, although there's only so much I can cover in a video, but I'm going to cover everything that you need to know, from what type of paddle craft, what are safety considerations, what's the deal with multi-day trips and day trips, where can you launch from, what are some hazards that you need to be aware of, what is some special gear that you should bring along. I'm going to cover it all in this video, and let's dive right into it, starting with the type of paddling that you can do on Georgian Bay. Now, there is a lot of great paddling all around Georgian Bay, but the highlight section is about 120 kilometer or 80 mile section between Killarney in the north and Parry Sound in the east. In that section, you have around 30,000 islands, and you have some stunning places to go, from Philip Edward Island in the north to the French River Provincial Park in the middle of that section. And then you have Franklin Island, McCoy's Islands, and the Mink Islands on the eastern side, closer to Parry Sound. Now, there's lots of paddling options. You can do day trips, you can do multi-day trips, you can do multi-day trips that are out and back, or you can do multi-day trips that are A to B, because you have lots of launch options from Killarney, the little town of Killarney in the north, to Parry Sound itself on the east. And in between, there are a number of places to launch from too, including Chickanishin Creek, Key River, Britt, Bayfield Inlet, and Snug Harbor. So what makes paddling on Georgian Bay unique? Well, the biggest thing is the 30,000 islands that you have, and it impacts your paddling and it impacts your camping. Now, paddling wise, with 30,000 islands, there are endless routes to choose from. But what you also get is protected water from wind and waves. In most cases, there's a channel or islands that offer protection from the big waves that can be generated on Georgian Bay. Now, that's not always the case. There are small channels that will be exposed that you might have to cross, and so you can't completely let your guard down, but those islands make Georgian Bay accessible to not only highly experienced paddlers who can handle those rough conditions, but entry-level paddlers who can stay in the protection of the islands. Now, those islands also present incredible camping opportunities. A lot of that land and a lot of those islands are crown land, which means you can camp freely wherever you want. That means there are literally hundreds of great campsites. There is some areas like the French River Provincial Park, which is provincial park, and you have to camp in designated areas, and you have to reserve your campsite. We'll talk more about that in a bit. And there are some islands that are private as well. And the further south and east you go, the more private property you'll find. Now, the type of paddlecraft you can take on Georgian Bay, well, you can really take canoes or sea kayaks. or touring kayaks. Now, sea kayaks or touring kayaks are definitely the preferred paddle craft for Georgian Bay because they handle wind and rough conditions much better than a canoe does. It doesn't mean you can't bring a canoe, it just means you have to be more careful with the canoe, and you can only paddle on days where there's less wind. Now, there really isn't any reason to take a canoe on Georgian Bay unless it's your preferred style of travel, because there's no portaging to do and you can fit a ton of gear into touring or sea kayaks. So how much experience is needed to enjoy Georgian Bay? Well, the great thing about Georgian Bay is because of all the islands it has, there is protection from the waves that can be generated on Georgian Bay, and that means almost any paddler can enjoy Georgian Bay. That being said, beginner or less experienced paddlers really need to pick calm days, and they need to stay in the protection of the islands and not venture offshore where wind and waves can drum up very quickly. A great option for beginners or less experienced paddlers is to take a guided trip. Now, experienced paddlers have more options. And when I say experienced, if you are comfortable in rough water and if you are comfortable and confident in doing rescues in rough water, then you can explore a lot more, not just within the islands, but the outer islands as well. So what are the overnight paddling options on Georgian Bay? Well, there are so many to choose from. You can do anything from a one night to, you could do a 2-week long trip on Georgian Bay and continue to explore new water. Sometimes people will do out and back overnight trips. Other times people will do point A to point B overnight trips and organize a shuttle. There's local outfitters who will provide the shuttle service for you. I'll talk more about that later. Now, when it comes to camping, a good portion of the land in Georgian Bay is crown land or public land, which means it's free to camp in Georgian Bay. Now, there is good chunks of land that is also provincial park, like the French River Provincial Park. Now, in provincial parks, you have designated camp spots and you have to reserve those spots and pay for them ahead of time. There is also private land which you cannot camp on. There is a Crown Land Atlas, which I'll leave a link in the description box too, and that shows you which land is Crown Land, which is provincial park, and which is private land. Now, a few things to know if you're going to do a camp trip on Georgian Bay. For one, you're not going to be camping on beautiful soil. Most of the time, you're going to be camping on rock. And so I would highly recommend bringing a thick sleeping pad. I use a nice fat 4-inch sleeping pad. And you know what? They now make 4-inch thick plush sleeping pads that pack down super small and light. So there's no reason not to bring it, except you do pay a pretty penny for them. Now, the other thing about camping on rock is that tent pegs don't work and the wind can blow there, so you need to tie your tent down. And so the way you do that is with guy lines. Now, not every tent has guy lines, and so make sure your tent has them before you go. If it doesn't, then you can just use some thin rope to create your own guy lines. These guy lines are going to go out and you're going to tie them to rocks. Now, you'll find a ring of rocks to tie your tent down to at most of the best campsites, and so you don't need to go searching for rocks. And you definitely don't need to bring your own rocks. Now, the other thing to know about camping on Georgian Bay is that the vast majority of campsites don't have thunderboxes or pit toilets, and that means you're going to have to dig a cat hole to do your business. And so, number one, bring a trowel. It simplifies that process. Other than that, make sure you dig that cat hole in a very low traffic area, nowhere near where people are going to be camping or hanging out, and do it 200 feet from the water, or 60 meters from the water. You have to find an earthy bit of ground to do it in, so you can dig a hole 6 to 9 inches deep. Now, when it comes to making reservations for a trip on Georgian Bay, if you're going to be camping on a crown land, you don't need a reservation. If you're camping within a provincial park, you do need a reservation, and you can make that reservation on the provincial park website. The only other type of reservation that you really need to think about is if you're doing a point A to point A trip and you need a shuttle. Don't leave it to the last minute, especially during the summer months, because the outfitters can get quite busy. Make that reservation, that shuttle reservation, well in advance. So what's the best time of year to go paddling on Georgian Bay? Well, you could paddle from ice out in late April till ice back in late November, but the best time to paddle is the 3 months of June, July, and August. This is when it's warmest, this is when the water's the warmest, and this is when the wind is the lightest. Now, if you want to paddle in the shoulder months, you better be an experienced paddler with the right gear, because the water and air temperature can be extremely cold and it can be very dangerous. So is there any recommended route or special place that you need to see? Well, not really. That's the joy of Georgian Bay. The joy of Georgian Bay is that it's all stunning. The whole bay in general is stunning, but within this 120 kilometer section, it's all gorgeous. And that means that people aren't going to be focused on any one area. People are going to be spread out through that whole 120 kilometers because it is all fantastic. The biggest hazards and dangers to worry about on Georgian Bay are wind and waves and the cold water. What you have to know about the wind and waves is that the wind can pick up on a moment's notice, and it will very quickly create significant waves. It can create very big and intimidating waves that can prevent paddlers from paddling. And so even if you're going out on a day trip, you need to be prepared to spend an unexpected night on the water. If you're doing a multi-day trip, you need to expect to have some down days where you're stuck at camp and you can't go paddling, and so bring extra food for that eventuality. Now, the water temperature is the other big hazard on Georgian Bay and any of the Great Lakes, because the water never gets warm. It's warmest at the end of July, and it usually is only around 68 or 69 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like 18 or 19 degrees Celsius, which is not warm. The rest of the time, it's significantly colder, and so you need to be prepared for the cold water. And that means being dressed to be able to comfortably survive an unexpected capsize and swim in that water. Now, what that looks like, that's a whole topic on its own, and I will leave a link in the description box to a video I did about dressing for paddling in cold conditions. The only other real hazard to be aware of is rattlesnakes. There are some rattlesnakes, in particular on the more southern part of Georgian Bay. I have never seen one. They're not common, but it is something that you need to be aware of. Now, there aren't a whole lot of rules or regulations when it comes to paddling and camping on Georgian Bay. As I've already mentioned, if you're camping in provincial park, well, you need to reserve a campsite, and you do that on their website. The only other rule or regulation is regards to fishing. If you're going to be doing any fishing in Georgian Bay, you need to get a fishing license, an Ontario fishing license, and I will leave a link in the description box down below to where you can get that. Now, on the topic of fishing, is there good fishing in Georgian Bay? Well, absolutely. You have everything from lake trout to walleye, muskie, pike, bass, lots of options for fishing. Now, when it comes to places to stay, the further north you go, the fewer the options there are. In the small town of Killarney, there are a couple of really nice options. You've got Killarney Mountain Lodge, and you've got the Sportsman's Inn, and you have a couple of other little B&Bs to choose from. As you travel east and south, there are inns and B&Bs in some of the small towns until you get to Perry Sound. Perry Sound has a bit of everything, including some hotel chains. Now, as for places to eat, there is also limited options, although there's some nice little bakeries and cafes and restaurants scattered throughout the small towns. The only challenge is sometimes their opening hours can be different than you might be expecting. There aren't a lot of grocery store options once you pass Parry Sound, and so it's good to do your shopping there or before you get to the area. There are a couple of really nice outfitter and guide options for Georgian Bay. Now, when it comes to outfitters, on the north side, you've got Killarney Outfitters, just outside of the little town of Killarney. And Killarney Outfitters it's a stopping ground for almost everyone that goes on a trip into Killarney Provincial Park or Georgian Bay. It's a great store, but they also, well, they have ice cream as well, but they also offer shuttle services. They offer great boat rental services, everything from carbon or Kevlar canoes and high quality sea kayaks, all the camp gear if you need it. They do full meal planning. They offer it all except for guided trips. Now on the east end of the bay in Parry Sound, you have White Squall. White Squall has been supporting Georgian Bay kayaking trips for decades as well. And they offer kayak rentals, shuttles, and they have a cool little shop there too, so you can pick up any last minute things that you need. Now when it comes to guided trips, there are a few options and there's lots of different trips to choose from. Black Feather is an adventure travel company that has been around and doing these types of trips for decades and are a great option. You also have a number of other guided trip options that I'm less familiar with. You have a company called Voyager Quest, you have Georgian Bay Tours, and there are even a couple of others that I found online. I'll leave links in the description box to the companies that I know. So where can you find more information about paddling on Georgian Bay? Well, a great place to start is with the outfitters, Killarney Outfitters and White Squall, because they've been supporting paddling adventures on Georgian Bay for decades. The next thing you can do is leave a question or comment down below, and I will get back to it as soon as possible, but also there's lots of people here who will share their knowledge of the area. That's all I got. I hope you've enjoyed this paddling guide. If you have, give it a thumbs up. Do leave a comment down below. Check out my other paddling guides to some of the other incredible multi-day paddling destinations around North America. And stay tuned for more paddling tips and gear reviews on my Paddle TV channel and paddling adventures on my Ken Whiting Adventures YouTube channel, which is also where you'll find my full adventure from Georgian Bay this year. Thanks for watching.